Hey everyone, I'm Reverend Jim. This is the whole Bible, the show where we go through the entire Bible from beginning to end. We are currently at the very end of Genesis 42 through 50. Now, confession. Can we have a confessional moment? This is the second time I'm recording this video because the first time I recorded it, I finished and then I looked at my camera and it said memory card full. Let me just check quick. Okay, we're good. Okay, let's dive in and see where take 2 ends up. All right, we are in the end of Genesis. We've been here quite a few videos. If you haven't watched those, you should go watch all of those videos, but finish this one first. Why not? Most of the book of Genesis is filled with the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. That's basically 12 through 50. Now remember, Genesis, the whole book, is myth and legend. The first 10 chapters are myth. The rest of the book is legend. That's how my seminary professor told me about the book of Genesis years ago, and I still think it's a great way to understand the book. None of this is a history book. None of this is an eyewitness account of someone saying, haha, let me just live stream the events of the ancient Near East. Nope, that's not what happened. So this is a legend. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Joseph. Joseph, we started last week with Joseph, part 1, where we had the whole moments where he's the favorite son, Technicolor Dreamcoat, gets, hated by most of his brothers, and then ends up being sold into slavery and ends up in Egypt. Egypt turned out to be an interesting scenario where we last saw him in prison and then suddenly promoted to vice pharaoh when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. This is the conclusion. So Genesis 42 through 50 completes the Joseph cycle and the book of Genesis by moving from betrayal and survival towards reckoning, reconciliation, and communal preservation. Now, these chapters are among the most carefully crafted narratives in the whole Hebrew Bible. It really shows psychological depth, narrative symmetry, and theological reflection on memory, power, and forgiveness. I think it's important to notice that. This feels like a edge-of-your-seat kind of drama, because that's how it was crafted. This story was told to make you lean in around the campfire as the legend of Joseph is being told. I mean, there's so much going on, and we're going to touch on some of the particular nuances and cyclical stories that we see from Genesis showing up again in this book. But here's Joseph. Once enslaved and imprisoned, now he holds power within an imperial system, and he has to decide how is he going to wield it, through vengeance, domination, or through life-preserving mercy. So let's dive in. We got, 9 chapters to cover here? So let's start with Genesis chapter 42. This is reckoning begins. The famine has driven Joseph's brothers to Egypt. Remember them? So last week, Joseph saw the famine coming, and now here we are. It was 7 good years and then 7 bad years. So we're in the 7 bad years. It's been a decade, essentially, since the events of Joseph's brothers in the pit in Egypt happened. Basically, Joseph's been dead for a decade. Everyone's grown up. Life has moved on. New babies have been born. People are hungry, and Joseph's family, along with lots of others, are hungry. So the brothers come, minus Benjamin, the youngest, because dad's a little protective of his favorite kids after what happened a decade ago with the brothers, apparently. So the brothers come, and Joseph recognizes his brothers, but his brothers don't recognize him. And so Joseph tests them, not for revenge, but to surface truth, guilt, and responsibility. And there's kind of this, if you want to come back for more, is there someone else in your family? Got to bring baby brother Benjamin. Ooh, Benjamin is kind of like the favorite. So that's chapter 42. 43 is risk and return. They have to come back. Food runs out. Famine's still famining. So the brothers return to Egypt with Benjamin, like they were told to do, or they wouldn't get more food, and they risk further loss and exposure. Judah here emerges as a figure of responsibility, whereas he's the firstborn. We had a lot of Judah stories last week where we didn't go into it in too much detail, but Judah kind of had some reservations about the whole killing his brother, throwing him into slavery, and there's kind of some parts of part 1 of Joseph's story that allude to Judah going back to try to rescue his brother, but alas, baby bro got sold before he could. Judah also had the moment with Tamar. Remember that whole story. So now Judah is still here, firstborn, and really his moment of responsibility seems like it signals a bit of moral growth within the family. So we got all sorts of characters evolving along the way. But that's where we come back, and we have Benjamin here. Now, in chapter 44, transformation revealed. A lot goes on here. First, we have Joseph engineering this final test that frames Benjamin. He plants some of the silver cups into his stuff, and they stop him. Oh, you stole from the vice pharaoh. How dare you? And in some ways, this echoes Joseph's own betrayal earlier, kind of a little bit of a subliminal back to his brothers. You thought you got me? What happens if baby brother gets got too? What's going to happen to you when you go home to dad then? But Judah is willing to sacrifice himself. Judah steps in. No, this can't do it again, guys. And it really marks a decisive break from the family's violent past. Chapter 45, Truth and Tears. All of this culminates. Joseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers and weeps openly. Joseph wept. Little interesting parallel foreshadowing to Jesus wept. Different circumstances, quite a bit, but still, weeping in the Bible from a male leader. Not the image of masculinity we always see, but here it is again. So Joseph chooses reconciliation over revenge, and the family begins healing through truth-telling, grief, and shared survival. Hooray! It all worked out for everybody. So chapter 46, Migration and Promise. Jacob and the family all come to Egypt. Come on, everybody, let's go to Egypt. Now, this is where I think we see some interesting cyclical storytelling, because we've been to Egypt before in Genesis. Remember, Abraham went there. Did Isaac go there? No, I think just Abraham went there twice. We've been to Egypt before, is what I'm saying. And we're about to be in Egypt for the next book, too. Jesus goes to Egypt when he's running away from infant genocide. But here we have, once again, the story taking us back to Egypt. You almost have this constant pull, and it really just shows you where the center of society, where there was some flourishing, people along the Nile, and people trying to find that the land flowing with milk and honey, the promised land. Where is it going to be? Maybe it's Egypt. Maybe this is the land God promised to us. Maybe they're taking up a deal that just seemed like, cool, the stars are seeming to align. This is the door that's opening. All this to say, Jacob and his family migrate to Egypt. They carry the promise forward into a foreign land. And God's reassurance here affirms divine presence amid displacement and demographic change. Even when things don't seem to be going the way you thought they were going to go, is God still with you? Stories like this say, yeah. Chapter 47, Survival and Power. So Joseph's famine policies save a lot of people, but it also consolidates a lot of power, binding everyone to Pharaoh. That's kind of the source from which they all survived this famine. And Joseph, as the one who interpreted the dreams and had the strategy to make it happen. It's once again a moment when this crisis leads to the people who already had most of the stuff ending up with a lot more of the stuff. Yeah, they helped. They created some jobs along the way. Way to go, billionaire becoming a trillionaire. Oh, that's obviously a commentary on the Bible and the world, and the way the Bible keeps Bibling and the world keeps worlding. Now, this chapter, like I'm kind of hinting at, invites this ethical reflection on survival strategies within unjust systems. If the world is on fire, do we privatize the fire department so that we can make profit off of helping others? Or should we just help others? Yeah, that's a big question. Chapter 48, Blessing Reversed. Okay, these last few chapters, these are the blink and you'll miss it. These are the you skip them because it just seems like a list of names, but there's some really cool stuff happening. This one in particular, I'm a little biased. I like this one. You're going to hear from me later on the Bible in a Minute video. I recorded that like years ago, and I still can't get over this chapter. This is the moment when Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. Joseph has a couple sons here. We don't know all of Joseph's story. We miss out on his whole life that he lived along the way, but he has a wife and kids, 2 of them. And later we're going to get into the 12 tribes of Israel. That's Jacob's sons. There is no tribe of Joseph. Joseph's 2 sons become 2 of the tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Whole lot of conversation about the historicity of the origin of this unified nation of Israel. Myth, legend, remember, whole Bible's true. Some of it even happened. But this is where Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are blessed by Jacob. Remember, getting the blessing from the patriarch's a big deal. Only what happens, Joseph brings his sons, the oldest son right before Jacob's right hand, the youngest son by the left hand, because the right hand is the good blessing, the left hand is the, second blessing. And what does Jacob do? He crosses his hands and gives the younger son the better blessing. Which is Jacob's story, the trickster who stole the blessing from his older brother, the younger brother who snuck into the, birthright and blessing. Now he's continuing that cycle by swapping the order of the blessing. So blessing disrupts hierarchy and expectations. Ooh, that'll preach right there. That's all in Genesis 48. Genesis 49, Memory and Destiny. Joseph continues to offer poetic blessings and critiques of his sons, naming their gifts and their failures. We got a lot of interesting ways he characterizes the sons of his brood. Now, this chapter preserves collective memory as a guide for future identity. Words create worlds, the legacy that isn't left behind, but that we send ahead. Chapter 50, Genesis 50, the final chapter in the book of Genesis, this book of beginnings. Jacob dies. Now, after Jacob's death, Joseph reassures his fearful brothers, and he rejects vengeance. I mean, come on. Is this now the time when he's going to get back at us for the thing we did so long ago? But no. Joseph says, we're good. We're good. And Genesis ends with a promise-oriented faith that trusts God's future beyond the present circumstances. So there's a big drama going on, especially in this last portion of Genesis. Joseph's story takes up a good chunk of the last book, and it really has the most unified narrative and drama. Compare it to, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They feel like they're pieced together, but this one is so fleshed out, which really tells us, did it actually happen this way? That's not the point. That's not the right question. This is how the story was constructed and told, and it becomes this legendary tale of Joseph and his brothers and how they ended up in Egypt in power. And then the inverse, when we get to, spoiler alert, Exodus, they're slaves on the underside of power. How do we go from being the saviors to the slaves? That's kind of what we see happening from page to page, Genesis 50 to, we're about to get to Exodus 1. So it's good to pause where we landed. Now we're going to watch 9 fantastic Bible in a Minute videos from a whole range of people. Look at them all. There's just a lineup of us. Let's dive in. You'll see them all on screen. And then we'll come back with a few questions. Here we go.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 42. The main figure of this passage is Joseph and the family drama that he has with his brothers, who did sell him into slavery after all. Many years after that, Joseph now holds a position of power and prophecy in Egypt during a devastating famine. His estranged and now hungry brothers, unaware of his identity, come seeking food. However, Joseph recognizes them and is kind of mean to them. He chooses to test them, eventually detaining Simeon, and demands the youngest brother, Benjamin, be brought on the risky journey to Egypt. The brothers, feeling these tests, start to have guilt over their past betrayal of Joseph. They have a heartfelt conversation in his presence, unaware that he understands what they are saying. There could be reconciliation, eventually. For now, we are to reflect on the complexities of forgiveness and growth, especially within family systems. And the story is far from over. We are left in the in-between time, the tension before reconciliation.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 43. Israel's sons are out of food again, and they need to go to Egypt to get more food during this time of famine. But they were told that they may not return unless they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin. So the sons go to Israel, Jacob, and request to bring Benjamin with them on this trek to get more food. And Jacob does not feel good about this. This is his second favorite son. And yes, he has a second favorite son. But eventually he relents and Benjamin goes with his brothers to Egypt. When they arrive, Joseph recognizes Benjamin and is overcome with emotion and love. He has to leave the room because he's weeping. He has to pull himself together and come back. He receives the brothers. He offers them a lavish meal. And in fact, he gives his favorite brother 5 times the serving of everyone else. You have to wonder, when is all of this favoritism going to end? Or will it ever?
Bible in a Minute, Genesis 44, aka what Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat left out. Joseph has his steward place a silver cup in Benjamin's food bag and then accuses him of stealing it and decides to make Benjamin a slave as punishment. But brother Judah speaks up about the implications for their father and their family if young Benny can't return home. Joseph is trying to gauge the possibility of building a trusting relationship with his brothers by devising this test, but their response to the accusation isn't about guilt or innocence. Rather, it reveals the dedication, care, love, concern, and respect the brothers have for their father and their family. It raises so many questions. Like, how do you repair broken trust? What would have happened if Joseph had initially revealed himself to his brothers? How do you let your past hurts influence your present? And what are the implications of that influence on generations past and present? God, give us the opportunity to observe growth in others, practice trust, and extend grace. Amen.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 45. Joseph finally breaks, weeping and revealing himself to his brothers. He tells them that the famine still has 5 years to go, but they can all move to Egypt and he'll make sure that they're okay. Which is great and all, this generosity towards his family, but it's interesting that everyone else still has to pay. Egypt turning this famine into a financial win, filling their banks as people struggle to fill their bellies. Now, maybe I'm just a bit skeptical of Joseph by this point. He had so many opportunities to drop the charade, but instead he kept messing with his brothers like a vindictive younger sibling reeling from their own unaddressed trauma. And in the end, he interprets it all as, God brought me here for a purpose, to save you and the whole world. I guess in hindsight, you really can see anything you want.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 46. Jacob makes his way to Egypt, taking his entire family. That's both his wives, Rachel and Leah, both their servants, Zilpah and Bilhah, all 12 of his sons and all their children, his only daughter Dinah and all her children. That's 3 generations of people. And he was scared. But he had to leave because there was a severe famine and he wanted to keep his family alive. God gives him courage and speaks to him in a dream saying, "Do not be afraid," promising that God's self will journey with Jacob and his family. Jacob's trek reminds me of the many caravans of families who journey to our southern borders with few options left for survival. I imagine that for many of them, they too have been encouraged by visions of the night where God has also said, "Do not be afraid, for I myself will go with you."
Bible in a Minute, Genesis 47. This chapter shows us the 2 sides of our character, Joseph. The one who's going to make sure that his family is provided for, that they have land and property to care for themselves, and the shrewd administrator who, as the famine gets worse, consolidates power to Pharaoh, that the Egyptians sell their land, their labor, and eventually enslave themselves to the crown. This chapter shows us the complicated relationship between the provision that empire provides and the cost of that provision. The whole narrative of Scripture wants us to see the deadly cost of empire, that Joseph is unwittingly paving the path for the enslavement of his own people in the future, and also wants us to ask, are there alternatives to empire that can provide provision for all without the deadly costs?
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 48. We're nearing the end of this book of beginnings, and in this chapter we find Jacob at the end of his life. Joseph brings his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to Jacob for a blessing. And just as we've seen previously when it comes to 2 sons and a mixed up blessing, Jacob crosses his hands and gives the greater blessing to the younger child, an intentional choice that mirrors his own journey as he stole the blessing from his older brother. And when we see it happening here, perhaps we can finally notice this recurring theme found in this family system. The younger Isaac is favored over Ishmael. Jacob steals the birthright and blessing from his older brother Esau. Joseph, the second youngest, was always his father's favorite. And now the favorite son's second favorite son is shown all the favor from the patriarch. We often assume to know who deserves what. But time and time again, God challenges our expectations and subverts our understanding of who is to be blessed.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 49.
Reuben, you are my might and the first fruits of my vigor.
Judah is a lion's whelp.
Issachar is a strong donkey.
Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears lovely fawn.
Benjamin is a ravenous wolf.
When Jacob ended his charge to his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. So if you're wondering how to bless your kids, I guess you could borrow this. But seriously, our words create worlds. What words are you speaking to the people in your life?
Bible in a Minute, Genesis, the final chapter, chapter 50. Israel dies. And after a period of mourning, Joseph requests from Pharaoh the permission to take his father to the land of Canaan so that he can be buried where Abraham is buried, in this place that will become known as the Promised Land. Pharaoh says yes. The brothers are worried that now is the time that Joseph is going to enact his vengeance upon them for the horrible ways they treated him back in the day. But even after they beg for forgiveness, Joseph says, "Do not be afraid. Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, to preserve a numerous people, as God is doing today." But then Joseph dies. But before he passes, he tells his people that when God calls them out of Egypt, to please bring his body back to the land of Canaan, back to the land they were promised. The end of Genesis.
Welcome back. Okay, fantastic videos. I know. And first question, as always, what stands out to you? What do you notice? Notice what you notice. What are the things that rise to the surface when you think about this particular portion of Joseph's story, the videos you just saw, everything I ranted on, not to mention all 50 chapters in the book as a whole. And then I have some specific questions about this section we just talked about here. First, what does this story teach about confronting past harm without repeating it? It's a good question for life in general. What role do grief, tears, and honesty play in healing trauma? Trauma is not just an internal thing, but there's an embodiment that needs to be processed. And Joseph's got some trauma. How do oppressed people navigate power without becoming oppressors? Whenever we figure that one out, let's make sure we spread the word. And last, what does it mean that Genesis ends in Egypt, not the promised land? I'm caught up now with this idea that maybe Jacob thought that Egypt was the promised land. Maybe that's where God is sending us. Wah, wah, wah. So there's some questions, some thoughts. I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and then we'll be back in a week or 2 or 3 with Exodus. So we're diving into a new book next. Thanks for hanging out for Genesis. Go back and watch the videos you missed, and we'll have more stuff coming soon. So talk to you on the next one.